My name is Grace Dobush, and I am an editor with Handelsblatt, the business newspaper here in Berlin, and I will be your host this evening, moderating, keeping everyone to their time schedules. And I'm really looking forward to hearing from everyone and getting to learn from all of these esteemed experts that we have with us this evening. Before we get started, I'd like to remind everyone to make sure that their devices are switched to silent, or at the very least vibrate mode. We are live streaming this event tonight, and we would hate to have any beeps or pings get in the way of the audience worldwide hearing that. But you don't need to put your cell phone away necessarily. If you decide to tweet or share anything about the event, you can use the hashtag Arctic Science Ministerial, and we hope that you do to help spread the word. And before we kick things off with our presenters, we'd like to have Veit Swoboda from Bremen, who is our host this evening, come and say a few words. Hi.
Thank you very much. All right. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the plenipotentiary of the Free Hanseatic City of Bremen, the Secretary of State, Ms. Yukaghir Elders, I would like to say to you, welcome to the Landesvertretung Bremen, to the official representation of the city Bremen in Berlin. I was kindly asked to say some words about the Landesvertretung and its tags, as I was told there are many international guests here today. So, as you might notice, the Landesvertretung, the representation, is located right in the middle of Berlin, in the so-called diplomatic area. And that makes sense because, in a way, we are an embassy as well. We're right next to the Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung, and if you look down the street, there's the embassy of Italy, of Japan, of Greece, and the Ministry of Defense is also right next to us. Our main tasks as an embassy for Bremen in Berlin, to represent the two city-states of Bremen and Bremerhaven, is first of all the participation in the federal legislation while considering the specific interests of our two city-states. So, as Bremen, as a Bundesland, we are part of the Bundesrat, the second chamber. And our second main task here in Berlin is to promote and present, for the promotion and the presentation of Bremen in terms of society, politics, culture, business, and science. And so here we are today, representing the city's, the research and science side of Bremen, and we are very happy and proud to have the Alfred Wegener Institute in Bremerhaven, with its long tradition in polar and marine research. It's an honor to have you here every time you're here, and as today I was told, in coordinating the network of REKLIM, which deals with regional climate change. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very curious about the outcome of this conference, dealing with climate, society, and sustainability. And once again, I want to welcome you here in the Landesvertretung. I hope you have a great time, you enjoy it, and you come back soon. Thank you.
Thank you. And next we'd like to call to the stage Antje Boetius.
Dear guests, let me warmly welcome you here. I'm very happy that you made it. I'm the director of the Alfred Wegener Institute for Polar Marine Research, and in a way I feel that I've inherited this great honor of welcoming you from the former director, Karen Dochte, who is not only my former director but also my PhD mom, and I'm very, very happy that sometimes in this world good things get inherited this way. So I welcome especially the people from the Arctic who are here this evening. You who live in the Arctic, you know what we are talking about, what we're going to talk about in the next few days. It's about a region that is not an extreme, inhabited, strange other planet than planet Earth. it's a place for people to live. It's a place where people think about their future. It's a place where people think about their past, their traditions, their livelihoods. And then there's all of us. And let me just say one word when I welcome you. I just come from Brazil. I've spent a week with students, young students in Brazil, Peru, Bolivia, all different places in Brazil and Middle America. And they feel the same as we feel, as all of we feel. This is the time when we have to fix our future. When we talk about Arctic ice, when we talk about the cryosphere, when we talk about climate, society and sustainability, which are the themes of tonight, but which also are the themes of the entire Arctic Science Ministerial, it's all connected. And I was really surprised finding that the young students from Peru and Brazil know everything about the Arctic. They know exactly about the state of the sea ice. Why is that so? Because we are connected, because we live in a time where our way to do research, our way to share data, our way to communicate allows us to all feel into the regions of Earth that are connected to the climate. So I'm very much looking forward to this evening, to hearing more from your stories, to discussing with you, and I would really like once again to welcome you very cordially in the name of the Alfred Wegener Institute, Helmholtz Center for Polar and Marine Research. And let me say one more thing. I'm a polar researcher myself. I spent a lot of times on our icebreaker Polarstern in the Arctic. I was there with students, with young people in 2012 when we had the greatest meltdown of the ice ever, and where we could see with our own eyes what it means when the Arctic is changing. I'm looking forward to your input and discussions. Cordially welcome.
And next I would like to call to the stage Klaus Grosfeld.
Dear Excellencies, dear distinguished guests from Germany and abroad, ladies and gentlemen, as one of the hosts of this side event for the second Arctic Science Ministerial, I'm happy to cordially welcome you to our event today. The Helmholtz Climate Initiative Regional Climate Change, or short REKLIM, is a consortium of 9 research centers in the Helmholtz Association, aiming to improve the knowledge based on regional climate change in reaction to the global forcing. More importantly, REKLIM facilitates various scientific opportunities for improving knowledge of the regional Earth system, in particular with respect to its impacts. With this, policymakers and decision makers are supported in assessing risks and opportunities and designing mitigation and adaptation strategies. And one of the most changing regions under climate change is, of course, the Arctic. The Arctic communities in particular depend on the integrity and sustainable impact of their environment. For indigenous population, traditional knowledge, social structures, eating habitats, languages, so almost the entire life are influenced by external factors. Not only the adaptive capacity of the Arctic population, but also its living environment, flora and fauna needs to be researched to minimize the risk that they face with climate change. With our event today, we bring together people from different backgrounds, scientists, representatives from indigenous communities as well as from educational institutions to discuss the need for comprehensive and integrated information on the Arctic and its inhabitants. With this short introduction, I would like to hand over to the second host of this event, Professor Borm from Université de Versailles, Paris-Saclay, with whom we collaborate on this issue for several years. Please.
Thank you, Klaus. Welcome. The University of Versailles Saint-Quentin is very, very proud to be associated with this event. We have been collaborating with AVI over a number of years, thanks to the support of Professor Lochte in the beginning, and we've been running a workshop series together. Just one or two words about our Arctic activities. We've been operating an Arctic Studies program. There are several graduates in the room here today, and we now have over 70 graduates coming out of this program and several PhDs. You can see a student also over there on the roll-up. Our university is known for its research in environment studies and climatology, and especially its Arctic campaigns. Our colleagues in atmosphere science are ranked second in the world in the Shanghai ranking, which is quite impressive, and all these people are working together with us, the human and social science team, in the Arctic Studies program and also in research projects. So we thought that it would be a good idea to focus on the notion of perception, because what people think and say about the Arctic is so much a question of perception that it's worth spending the evening thinking about it, and that's the idea we had to organize this event. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Jan, Klaus, Antje, Veit. So for the next approximately 75 minutes, we are going to be hearing presentations from a number of experts who are here with us this evening. Each one of them has a unique perspective, and they will welcome your questions after their presentations. After the four presenters, we will have a short break where you can get some refreshments, and then we will have a panel discussion with many of those experts and more experts, and we have plenty of time for your questions as well. And then after that, we will have a reception where you are welcome to meet. We hope you exchange ideas, meet one another, and just have a really great evening. So kicking off our section on presentations is Torsten Sachs. And Torsten is joining us from the German Research Center for Geosciences in Potsdam, where he leads a Helmholtz Young Investigators Group. He's also a junior professor at the Technical University of Brunswick. So, Torsten, please.
Thank you, Grace, for that introduction. Welcome, everybody, to this evening. And thank you, Klaus and Antje, for the invitation today. My job is to bring you up to speed or warm you up on the natural science perspective of the Arctic, and try and do that in a kind of tour de force, hitting as many topics as possible in 1 or 2 slides each. Let's see how it works. What does that work here first? So let's start with the obvious. That's not a hoax, neither by greedy scientists nor by Chinese or anyone else. That's the warming the Arctic has seen during my lifetime, and you will notice when I stopped aging. And that's the annual mean temperature deviation from the long-term trend. You already see there's a lot of warming happening in the Arctic. It's twice the rate of the global average. But if we zoom in a bit more and look at the different seasons, summer versus winter, that's the right one. We see here in the winter part, most of the music is actually in the winter, and most of us scientists are actually summer scientists. It's also harder to access in winter. So, but you already see one of the problems we face here working up north. That's the whole thing in motion. And one thing I want to just point out here, that even though we're looking at a global process, the expressions are regional. We have cold years here and there, we have warm years here and there, and that's why we need to look at the regional scale to understand the system more deeply. So both sides, Pan-Arctic and regional. So first up, you probably know that from the media, we see massive ice losses on the Greenland ice sheet. That is work here contributed by colleagues at RE. This indicates the annual loss in gigatons of ice, big numbers. The only thing you need to remember from this slide is we're losing ice pretty much every year. And the total over the 14 years that's depicted here is equivalent to 1 centimeter of sea level rise. And that is global, not just in the waters around Greenland. That's globally 1 centimeter of sea level rise, just from that melting ice cap. More ice is floating on the Arctic Ocean. That will not contribute to sea level rise, but you can imagine if that big wide area here disappears and frees up a big dark ocean, that absorbs a lot of heat that's hitting the north. So here too we see massive losses of sea ice, both extent and volume, so thickness. The record being in 2012, as mentioned earlier. But this year also, well, this year was not quite as bad, but right now actually we're below most of the previous years. And that is pretty much up to the groups. That is very much up to date. You can see that's the slide from yesterday, so that's pretty much real-time data. So we have warming, we have more open water, higher water levels. If you add that all together and cook it for a while, this is what's happening on the coasts. 34% of the Arctic coasts are permafrost coasts. Not all of them are loose material like that, but where they consist of this loose and consolidated material, we see massive amounts of coastal erosion during the open water season, especially when the storms hit. Once the reindeer goes away, that likes to hang out on the beach here, you will see in a few seconds now, there's a storm rolling in, and large chunks of that coast will disappear into the Beaufort Sea. That's a camera on a spot called True Point in northern Alaska. Right now we're seeing a doubling and parts quadrupling of the coastal erosion in large tracts of the Alaskan coast. And that, as you can imagine, becomes really problematic if there are actually settlements along that coast, which there are. Barrock here is not Yukaghir, Kaktovik further on towards the Canadian side. And quite some of these communities are actually having to entertain the idea of relocating further inland. Because it's just not sustainable to keep fighting against that erosion. Another thing that erosion does, that's a so-called thaw slump on Herschel Island. It dumps a lot of material into the nearshore coastal zone on which people depend for fishing and other ways of life. And you can see that here. That's organic carbon, nutrients, potentially pollutants in some areas, and that will have a pronounced effect on the entire coastal ecosystem. Don't get confused by all these colors. This slide shows you the change in snow cover, so we're gradually moving onto land now. Especially in the southern parts, the left side here is for March, this is for April. In the southern fringes of the Arctic and Boreal zone, we're losing snow cover thickness. Earlier in the winter, that might be the other way around, so there's not such a clear overall picture of the snow cover. That's fairly complicated and very diverse regional expressions. That's another way of showing that. It depicts the water that's contained in snow also for April averages, and it's decreasing. And the effect that has is, it extends the growing season. The snow cover decides how many effects on the entire ecosystem on land. We're seeing here is the greening trend. For a long time there's this talk about greening of the Arctic. We're also seeing some spots where there's actually browning of the Arctic. The current focus of our vegetation colleagues is more on the seasonality. How much do growing seasons extend and in which direction when the processes actually start. And now we're moving to the permafrost. Now we're going into the sort of invisible world. Permafrost is a temperature phenomenon. You cannot directly see it. It's ground that remains frozen for at least 2 consecutive years. And on top of it, we have a layer that thaws seasonally every year, the so-called active layer. So we actually have to drill into the permafrost to measure its temperature. And that is done at a global network of boreholes, and most of the boreholes in the world, here are some examples from Alaska, for example. We see a strong warming trend of about 0.5 degree per decade. So that's another strong indicator for the effects. Also the active layer, as I mentioned, the part on top of the permafrost has a strongly increasing trend of thaw depth, especially in western Siberia and the Russian European north. And that is important because permafrost stores a massive amount of organic carbon. It's locked in there like in a freezer, but if it starts thawing, we don't know what's happening. We'll get back to that later. So thawing from the top is the thing that happens gradually. And then we have these stronger, more pulse-like disturbances. Draining of lakes, sudden thawing of ice wedges that create polygonal planets in the ground and create routes for water to disappear. Thaw gullies, slumps like we saw on the coastal image earlier, all of that dumps material into the freshwater system. Shrubs moving up north, trees sometimes even stabilizing parts of the system, but also catching more snow, leading to higher snow cover in the vegetated area, more isolation and so on. So there are lots and lots of interconnected processes that we have to figure out how they all interact together and make the system react. One example for a strong disturbance is this one here. That's the North Slope of Alaska, Brooks Range right here. And that's a fire that started in 2007, I think, and it burned 1,000 square kilometers of tundra. And in that fire alone, the amount of carbon that was lost is similar to what the entire global tundra takes out of the atmosphere in 1 year, lost in one fire. So it's important to know how many of these kind of disturbances happen, where they happen, if they increase or not. One way to do that is, since they tend to happen not where we have our measurement instruments. So this is where remote sensing comes in very handy. Some of the satellites that are up in space have quite a long track record. NASA, for example, has been tracking surface changes for decades now, and with the right computing power and algorithms, we can now stack all these layers of satellite images and do change detection over time with time series of satellite images and figure out where do we have these disturbances, where do we see new lakes, where do we see draining lakes, fire scars, and so on and so forth. So it's important to do that on a continental or pan-Arctic scale rather than on individual fire scars, for example. All of that feeds into another big issue, especially in connection with permafrost and also greenhouse gases. I mentioned earlier, large store of organic carbons. What happens when it thaws? What you see here now is the build-up of CO2 in the winter, and then in the summer, where am I? I'm not in the summer here, this is winter. So build-up of CO2 in the winter in the northern hemisphere, and then as the vegetation starts greening in summer, you see how it starts to let the CO2 out of the atmosphere. So for a long time, we're pretty sure that at least for CO2, boreal and tundra systems are a sink. Not so sure if that's still the case. Modeling studies tell us that we're going to lose a lot of carbon from permafrost by the end of the century. And a synthesis study that we just submitted last week also suggests that the tundra has actually switched to a source. But all of these estimates are highly uncertain because they're based on very few sites where we can measure these things. So that's a map of so-called flux towers. That's where we measure the exchange of gases continuously, if the funding is continuous, and on a sort of area of several hectares. You can see here, north of 64 degrees, there are only 27 of those sites active for more than a year or so, and especially active in the past 10 years. Most of these are clustered in Alaska, and then some here in Swoboda in northern Europe. And there are, I think, hard to see, 4 sites in the entire huge Russian Arctic. And that's just simply not enough to get data where we can be really certain of what we're seeing there. So one way forward might be to move more towards continental scale observations, be it from satellites or from aircraft, from mobile and modular observing systems that we can rapidly deploy into areas where we see things happening, for example, these disturbances. We always need long-term observing networks to attach these short-term observations to, and it's got to be both regional and pan-Arctic. And that's the end already. We'll skip that in the interest of time. My personal wish list, Christmas is right at the door. We need a pan-Arctic long-term observing system, much denser than now, because we still really lack data, not just in winter, but in particular in winter. Another very important thing is that we openly share and access our data, as well as infrastructure. You saw some of the maps. A large chunk of the Arctic is on Russian territory. It's super important that we can continue to work also in that part of the world, because otherwise we see only half of the picture. And with that, I think I'm done with my time. Thank you.
Thank you. Because we have time for some questions from the audience. If anyone from the audience has some questions, we have some microphones that will go around and you can raise your hand to receive one of them. I have a quick question to start with, and that is, a gigaton of ice, what does that look like? I can't even imagine what that looks like. How big is that?
I don't know, actually. I haven't seen a gigaton of ice.
Well, that'll be a question.
I'm not a terrestrial guy, as you might have seen, but it's a lot of detail.
Maybe during the break we can figure it out and come back with some sort of equivalence for, I'm thinking maybe a soccer field.
There's probably a way to translate that into truckloads or something. But,
Actually, it's a cubic a little bit larger than 1 kilometer in each direction.
A little bit larger than 1 kilometer in each direction of ice. All right, thank you, sir. Are there any questions from the audience? Otherwise, I can keep going. I've got many more questions. One thing that I was thinking of when you were first getting started was President Trump's recent comments about climate change and how he thinks something's happening, but maybe it will go back. How would you explain what's happening to Donald Trump? He could be watching right now, for all we know.
I need a glass of wine for that. Well, it's hard to talk about facts when people prefer to believe rather than talk about facts. I don't know if there's a way to actually talk about these things with that particular person.
One could also, how would you explain it to a 5-year-old?
I mean, the data is there. You can, and especially the temperature data. And those are not model data; those are measured data. You can show the people this is where it's going. And there are ice cores that go back hundreds of thousands of years. You can actually show the people that it has never been warmer. At least not while we've been around. I mean, the Earth will survive all of that, no problem. But we haven't been around for so long, and we've been around only in a very stable climatic period. And that's the issue. And we like to settle in low-lying areas close to the coast, and things like that.
Those beachfront villas will be the undoing of the human race. We do have one question here in the front, please.
Yes. We have on Friday to tell the ministers what we really want to do in the next 2 years. So they need to have something really concrete, not we need to understand and so on. I mean, this is not what they want. They want to know what can we do to help. So what would you like to tell them?
Well, in the next 2 years, we happen to have a very big Arctic expedition that fills some gaps in basic, essential climate data in the Arctic Ocean. And that's where quite a few of us will be busy with.
It's already running.
That's already running, yes. My tiny little personal part of the Arctic puzzle will be to get some of our new equipment into Russian border zone areas to extend our this and get away from point measurements, like one tiny little point in the huge area, and become more spatial in that very understanding.
Great question. We have one question in the back, and then we have one more question in the front, and then we'll move along. Please introduce yourself and your affiliation.
Yes, I'm Vyacheslav Shadrin. I'm the Councillor for Science with the Embassy of Canada. Thank you for this event. I guess to rephrase the question in a different way from Trump's questions, because there's a lot of intoxications out there. Are we able to disqualify a lot of the things that are being said, whether it's this wave or shift of herds? You know, we know all about the issues related to the emissions and stuff, but some of the arguments that are being proposed to explain that from an alternative facts point of view, are we 100% confident that these don't play any role in any ways? That we've not observed a herd shifting or something on its tidal axis or anything of that sort happening?
I must have missed some of it. We're not sure about not seeing what.
I guess the point is that a lot of the intoxications, information, there's lots of alternative people, facts that are trying to bring forward other alternative explanations to these climate change, whether there's 99% of scientists agrees, but there are still people that pretends to be scientifically informed about things and pretend that it can be associated to some other facts. So are we able to completely discount their arguments from a scientific perspective on these issues at the moment? I guess that's, hopefully it's clear.
I think we are. And we have been for a while.
And one last question here from the front.
Antje Boetius at the REKLIM Institute. What do you think from the system you're studying, the plant, the soil, the water? Can you say something about the question of thresholds? So what's our chance before anything goes so bad that there is no point of return when it comes to soil, water and plants? Do you have some thoughts about that?
Well, so my pet is the greenhouse gases, and I still think it's really hard to tell. I mean, there are a lot of studies saying, oh, we have this methane bomb here, methane bomb there, lots of carbon emissions. Then there are others that look at some of the few sites that we have and say, well, in the past 30 years, nothing significant has happened. And where exactly the truth is one thing, and then the second thing is, well, the quantification of translating emissions into additional degrees of warming, that's kind of the modeler's job, I guess. But one of the studies that I have in my mind says 0.3 degrees of extra warming just from permafrost carbon by the end of the century. If that's true, then we're not talking about 1.5 degrees, but 1.2, and that probably doesn't make it easier. But we keep ignoring that. And again, even in the next part, it's not part of the IPCC models because it screws up some other part of the model.
Thank you so much, Torsten. Let's give him a round of applause. And next with us from Russia is Vyacheslav Shadrin. He is a research fellow at the Institute for Humanities Research and Indigenous Studies of the North. He's involved with Indigenous Peoples Movement in Yakutia and a deputy chairman of the Yakutia Association of Indigenous Peoples of the North. Please welcome Vyacheslav.
Thank you. And first of all, I want to introduce who are the indigenous peoples of the North in Russia. We have a special status, and we must be by these four criteria. First criteria is number. The number must be less than 50,000 people. They must live on their traditional territories. They must preserve their traditional livelihood, and they must have independent ethnic self-identity. And you understand that not all the indigenous peoples are included in this list because some of them, their numbers may be more than 50,000. 40,000 people. That is why, when we speak about North Indigenous peoples of Russia, in this term we include 41 indigenous groups. Total population is around 240,000 people. It's by the census of 2010. They live on the 34 regions of Russia, which are maybe near 2/3 of territory of Russia. And now I want to speak what's happened in our life. You understand that our life is closely connected with our land, with our waters. In this picture you see one of the reindeer camps. And the indigenous peoples have an intimate and close connections with nature, with their surrounding ecosystems. And that is why our traditional knowledge helped them survive in extreme weather conditions for many, many centuries, for many years. But now something happened, something changed. And the main challenges of indigenous peoples of Russia now, which connect with climate change, is maybe these two observations, maybe these two reasons. The first is the weather instability, and the second is unpredictability of the weather. And first of all, about instability, because last 10 years maybe we can say that the number of natural anomalies increases dramatically. Sudden changes in temperatures, many times in the year, rains in the winter, snowfalls in the summer, permanent floods from spring to autumn in some our territories have become constant. Every year started being. About prediction of weather, we can no longer predict the weather. This traditional knowledge can help us for long period, for many years, and the ability to predict the weather was one of the main tools for us to survive us. But now there's weather change, climate change, and many of our predictions now doesn't work. The changes we see that some changes in the behavior of animals. Now we can't understand what's happening, for example, with the wolves, with bears. Many questions appear, for example, with the roots of wild reindeers, because sometimes they appear and we can't do anything at that time. Something happened with weather, wind direction and duration, natural phenomena, and all of them become unpredictable. You must understand that success of hunting, fishing, domestic reindeer preservation depends on our traditional knowledge, depends from our ability to predict the weather. But now it's changed. As our elders says, nature doesn't trust us anymore. And this is starting to be maybe one of the main challenges for us. We can say that another impact from the climate change for our villages is an impact for our infrastructure. Shoreline erosion causing great troubles to our peoples and put an issue of closing or moving or replacing of some of our settlements. Houses built on stilts or piles, I don't know, or maybe columns, become emergency, many of them. The time of winter roads has reduced. For example, maybe 15 years ago, the usual times of work of these winter roads was 5-6 months. But now, sometimes we see that the time of work of these winter roads sometimes has become only 2 months. And with some economic reasons, we are very dependent from the time working of winter roads. And if it works so little time, it means that we face many social economic challenges in our life. And another challenge is air site closed in many villages because the permafrost melting destroy these sites, and now we can't see, for example, planes in our place, only helicopters. But helicopters are very expensive for us. We face many changes in water region of rivers, lakes, changing in ice formation time, and all of this greatly affect for our fishing. And maybe another challenge, it's not straight, but it's, I say about the availability of natural resources, because this permafrost melts, and this is why more and more our resources start to be more available for industrial companies. And this is a map of the main industrial mining sites where our main industrial companies work. And you see that these sites are, if we remember the review map of where the indigenous peoples live, that you see that this is the same territories. On the indigenous territories in Russia, there are more than 80% of water resources, more than 90% of forest, all the diamonds, more than 90% of oil, gas, gold, coal, and other mineral resources. And it starts to be a challenge for us. The main challenge of this industrial development, because sometimes we lose our lands because they're taken from us to these industrial projects. Some of our lands degrade from this industrialization, and many of our traditional activities are reduced in these conditions. And we say that mineral resources are not a richness for us, but a danger for us. And that is why many of our elders say we can adapt for everything, for every changes, because we have this experience for centuries, but we can't adapt without our lands. And maybe this is the main challenge for us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we have time for questions, of course. Our microphone carriers are here and ready for you. Just raise your hand if you've got a question. I have a question myself. I'm curious. You mentioned that the protections for indigenous groups in Russia, it applies to groups of under 50,000 people, and there are 240,000 people in 41 groups who are protected. Are there many groups that are larger than 50,000 people who do not have? If that number, if those people are included, how big does the population of indigenous people in Russia become?
However, the number of indigenous peoples rise, but some of our groups, the situations is different. For example, maybe one of our indigenous groups, which the number is the most bigger, is Nemets people. There are now maybe 42,000 persons. But another have more smaller number. For example, my people, I'm chief of Yukaghir people, and the population of Yukaghir people now is 1,603 persons by the census 2010. And this is the difference. But we understand that by the international law, some indigenous peoples can be included in the international and recognized as indigenous by on the international level. For example, Yaku people, their populations is, for example, 450,000. And other groups, for example, Burya, Komi, Karel, and others are indigenous, but their number is more.
We have a question here in the back. There's the lady.
Hello, my name is Anne Momstad from REKLIM Institute. I'm one of the people here around working in the Siberian Arctic, and I think many of us are aware that the natural studies that we do, the natural scientific studies, they do relate to the livelihood of you. But I think it's still not as well established in Russia as, for example, in Canada or Northern Alaska to really translate our studies to the people who actually live there. And I wonder if you have some advice to us scientists how we can move better in this direction.
Today, this morning, we have a meetings with some students and very researchers, and we speak about it. And I say that one of the main principles now which demand indigenous peoples is indigenous participation in all the, not only in research, but all in the decision-making processes which are connected with indigenous peoples. This principles is as nothing about us without us. And we know that this is or maybe the main trend which connects with indigenous peoples. And I think if you plan, for example, some researchers in the indigenous territories and which connect with indigenous people, maybe we must connect with all the keepers of, not all the, but with some keepers of traditional knowledge, with local communities, and think what's useful comes from your research to these peoples. Maybe it's something happened straightly for these communities. Maybe sometimes it's maybe like some recommendations for local or state authorities. Or maybe sometimes today I speak about, for example, about attention from media, because sometimes it can help us to focus on our problems.
Here in the front row we had a question. Or, yep. Oh, we have one in the middle, yes?
Yeah, okay, sorry. Annika Kuhn from Kiel University. I've got a question related to what you answered before. It's with regard to the Arctic Council and indigenous participation, because at least in theory the Arctic Council is meant to foster indigenous participation. Would you say that the Arctic Council, the work of the Arctic Council actually make a difference for you? And does it help you to increase political participation?
Yes, Arctic Council is one of the main platform base where we can work with the state authorities. For example, you know that the Arctic Council have permanent participants. Half of them is a representative of states, another half is a representative of indigenous peoples. And we, at this Arctic Council level, we work on one level with our representative of countries. And you know that many projects through the Arctic Council where our indigenous communities are involved now is worked, and I think this is a great possibility to involve our indigenous community in all the processes. And Arctic Council maybe now is maybe one of the best example of indigenous respect of indigenous rights.
We have time for one last short question.
My question was about your knowledge system and how you transfer the knowledge, and if the new channels of communication and media are relevant to you. Can you say a few words about how you pass on the traditional knowledge and if this is changing currently?
Every time some people ask me, you say that traditional knowledge stopped to work. But we must understand that traditional knowledge isn't a frozen knowledge, because it's every time is changed too. But now maybe it doesn't so much help us, for example, in our traditional activities, because weather is not stable yet. But we hope that maybe the next years it's come for more stability, and in that case we find and create new traditional knowledges. But however, for example, in the before my many years, for example, sometimes these anomalies happen for many years. For example, sometimes we can remember that, for example, in 50s or 60s something happens the same, but this was the rare situations. But now we see that this instability and this anomalies start being more and more many, and that's why it's sometimes, and another situation that now we are facing the changing of generations. Many of many of our elders, the keepers of traditional knowledge, pass away, and we are now facing that we hasn't enough traditional knowledge. This is maybe one of our challenge for us too. And I think that's this.
And I think we'll be talking about that more during the panel discussion as well after the break. Let's give Vyacheslav a hand. And next with us from Greenland is Rosing-Petersen. He is a political and industrial consultant, and he was a member of Greenland's Parliament from 1999 to 2009. And from 2014 until this year, just earlier this year. Pierre, please, welcome.
Thank you. I have to see how to control this one. Yeah. Just to give you an impression on how Greenland is, if not you have been there before. This is taken at the same period last year. You can see the Aurora Borealis, and it is taken from Nuuk. Greenland, I'll tell you about Greenland in a brief facts. Greenland is the biggest island in the world. We have around 2.2 million square kilometers, so we have a lot of breakground. If you are thinking about that, we are only 57,000 people living there, so we have a lot of space. That also means that we have a lot of natural resources. We have the ability for the natural resources. Even though we are quite remote on top of the world, far away from Europe, far away from the wars and everything is going on the southern part of the world. Also means that we have, beside the deposit of the mineral resources, we have also the second largest pure drinking water reservoir in our ice cap. It's only the South Pole that has more than Greenland. And that's also where all the scientists are working on the ice core project, like Professor Sachs was mentioned beside that. Also, one of the things is that even though we only 57,000 people living there, almost 76% of our energy is hydropower, renewable, pure energy. So we are very much aware of that we should be a good example for the rest of the world regarding how to reduce the carbon dioxide pollution. Greenland is a politically stable country with democratic elected parliament and government as well. And we have a self-autonomy. In 79 we got the home rule, and in 2008 we have an election to extend our self-autonomy. So we have the self-governance. We're still a part of the Danish kingdom, but only justice and foreign affairs is a Danish matter, the rest is for the Greenlandic matter. After the last election in 2014, I was one of the members of the parliament that put a bill to the parliament to create a constitution committee. There was a huge majority in the parliament to create it, so we are working on a draft of a constitution for the sovereign state of Greenland. This is also a part of Greenland. So we still have some icebergs, as you can see. The society, in Greenland we have 5 municipalities. It was reduced in 2008 from 18 municipalities to be only 5. It was actually 4, but now we have 1 more, so have this near democracy to be practiced more precise. The capital is in Nuuk. And Nuuk is located in the municipality of Swoboda. Greenland is habited for more than 90% on the western and southwestern part of Greenland, and almost around 10% is living on the eastern part of Greenland. So the concentration is quite on the southwestern part of Greenland. All education is free, and the government expenses for education is one of the highest per capita in the world. It's slightly, if not the highest, we are competing with Sweden regarding that figure. So it is extremely important for us to with education, regarding education. We have free medical care. We have free social security system, but in spite of that, and very unfortunately, we have one of the highest suicide rate per capita in the world. And why? We can also discuss that in the panel later on. And the gap between few rich and a large majority of poor is similar to many civilized countries in the western part of the world. So there is nothing odd regarding that. To improve that, we need reforms, and we can also talk about it later, and I will also discuss it when we come to the economic headline. Our major export is fishery. But we have a lot of unexploited mineral resources in Greenland. The size also says that automatically that we have a lot of mineral resources, and I also mentioned that we have this second largest drinking water reservoir. I'm trying to repeat that because there is a United Nations report saying that in 2025 there will be between 1.8 till 2 billion people that will be in distress, need for water here and now. So we have to, we have to coordinate things. Some part of the world is in need for something, while other part of the world has excess resources for like water. So it is a question of coordination, and I think that United Nations has a real key role in such issue, like how to share the water to the rest of the world. Most of the large companies in Greenland is actually owned by the government. And that also comes back, when we come back to the question, we need reforms and how. We have compared to other countries, one of the best tools to do the reforms, because while we have all the big companies in charge, we can actually divert the companies to cooperate with the political solution when we are doing some reforms. And that also means that the economic growth has, due to mentioned political system, and the large majority of the big companies is also government. They won't be able to change the politics. But it is just also a question if the politician knows that they have the tool. In 2012, there was Antje Boetius came on behalf of EU and make a letter of intent agreement with Greenland with our former Premier Kleist. And I'm mentioning because we have a lot of cooperation with other countries, many countries, regarding defense, regarding trade, regarding everything. But this special agreement we made with EU in 2012, it has a special place in Greenland because Antje Boetius mentioned it clearly that it has to be a win-win situation. Any kind of relation we have between two people, between organizations, between countries, if there is not an equal and respectful relationship, it is doomed from the beginning, and it is extremely important that any kind of cooperation have to be on win-win situation. And this is the key for the future independent Greenland, in my point of view. Education. As I mentioned, elementary school and high school is absolutely free. And higher education, like university, for the large majority is also free. There's only a few studies that you have to pay for yourself. We have our own university in Greenland. UVSQ and Vasa University is cooperating with UVSQ. And as far as I recall, Tromsø is also universities from Arctic is also cooperating with UVSQ. It is pretty new compared to other universities, and actually founded from my uncle, former professor Rosing-Petersen. It is growing for every year, and remember that we only 57,000 people, so when 193 new students started this year, it's the biggest figure number that has been started so far. So the students are growing, but we all have also many students because it's quite limited. You can study medicine, for example. You can study technical engineering and so on. So you have to go abroad to do that. The biggest part of student going abroad is going to Denmark and Nordic countries, but there's also some going international too. But we have also a challenge regarding the students studying abroad, since a large majority, actually half of those who is going abroad do not return when they finish. They stay there for a longer period. If not, they stay permanently because, it happens for everyone that they meet someone, they fall in love, and they start creating a family and they get stable. So it's one of the challenges we also are facing because remember that we are educating those young students so they can be for the benefit of the Greenland society. So it is a big challenge that we have to get those young students when they finish with a candidate degree to get back to Greenland. So that's it. One of the former ICC presidents, Mary Simon, a Canadian Inuit, said that the Arctic is our climate canary in the coal mine. And it is actually one of the true facts because as Slav also mentioned that we face climate change every single day in Greenland. We see it every day. So traditional knowledge, indigenous knowledge, have to be listened to when we are dealing with how to convince the rest of the world and some president maybe that it is not an alternative fact, it is a true fact. Thank you.
We have time for a few quick questions. I see one in the middle. There'll be a microphone coming to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Adrian Brown. I'm from the Arctic Center, University of Lapland, based in Rovaniemi, Finland. And I'm interested in Arctic mining issues, particularly in the Barents region, so partly perhaps also in Greenland. And as we are knowing, there's a lot of exploration of metals and minerals ongoing in Greenland. And I'm very much interested in societal and ecological impacts of this perspective. And linking into the topic of this evening, perceiving Arctic change, and from your point of view, how are Greenlanders perceiving the changes that mining or large-scale mining would bring to the land in ecological and societal terms, not only the mining areas, but also access roads, logistics, and how to get the mined metals and minerals to the global markets that are quite remote or quite far away from Greenland. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the question. Mining is actually pretty new for the Greenlandic perspective. We have been mining before, but it stopped for many years and now it's just starting up again. We have around 90 licenses for exploration, and so far, as I recall, we have something like 12 exploitation licenses given to different companies. So it is on early stage we are talking about, and the Mineral Act we have in Greenland is similar to the same model as Saskatchewan. That should be one of the most demanding mineral acts in the world, and we have like any kind of mining you have in other part of the world, requirements like that you have to have a social impact assessment report and environmental assessment report as well that have to be approved before you can grant a license to anyone who wants to start up exploiting a mineral in Greenland.
We have one more question there in the back.
Thank you very much for the interesting facts about Greenland. My name is Arne Bigel. I work at the Ecological Institute here in Berlin, also on Arctic governance. And since you mentioned the committee that is developing a constitution for Greenland, I would just like to ask a following up question, basically. If there's a timeline to establish the constitution, and if there's already a timeline, at least in the discussion in the public in Greenland, when that independence could become actual reality. Thank you very much.
I'm actually a member of this Constitution Committee, so I'm very happy that you put up the question. We started 2 years ago, and we are, we had an election in April this year, and the government has been changing a couple of times since then, unfortunately, and that has postponed our work with the Constitution Committee. So the goal that we should finish with the draft was within 2 years when we started. It has been postponed that we have to 2020, 2021 we will be able to put up a draft that had to be elected by the Greenlandic people. It has been my goal, my own personal goal, that we could declare Greenland as a sovereign state in 2021 when we are celebrating the 300 years when we were colonized by a Danish priest, but I think it will be slightly more than that, hopefully before 2025. That's it goal everyone is wishing. And on the last election we had for the extended self-autonomy, more than 76% voted for that.
I think we will probably chat a bit more about that during the panel discussion after the break. But thank you so much, Pierre. Let's give him a round of applause. And so now the final presenter before we take a short break for refreshments is Jan Borm. Jan is a professor of British literature at the University of Versailles, as well as co-leader and creator of the Arctic Studies Master's program there. So Jan, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Grace. I understand my responsibility is that I stand between you and refreshments. So. My talk is about perception, the theme of perception. About the North, I am not going to define the North, we would lose a lot of time. Our theme is Arctic. But I wanted to start off with this picture. We're in Svalbard here on a day where you might not feel like sitting on that bench actually, but I thought it showed the perspective. To talk about this idea of the imagined North, it's a well-known factor in tourism studies, for instance, that people, before they go anywhere, even the first time, they've already been imagining the place. And so the impact of imagination on how we see things is very, very strong. And if you put all that together, the vast amount of information you can get on how people have been thinking and writing about the Arctic is what Daniel Chartier, colleague from the University of Quebec, Montreal, would call the imagined North. So what is the imagined North? You have it called there, I'm not going to read it out. Just the term organic is interesting, that there is not a fixed corpus of what the Arctic is or should be. So a historical perspective to start off with, maybe. Sir John Davis is a well-known name because we have Davis Strait, and the British were engaged in exploring ways of reaching China in the Renaissance, while other nations were employed in taking possession of other parts of the world. But it is interesting that in a traveller like him, you still have the image that the people who live closest to the North Pole must be the happiest people, because that's the place of greatest dignity. I'm quite convinced that his view is still influenced by classical authors, and the image that we have in classical mythology of the far north, Hyperborea, as a very lovely place of Hyperboreans who are happy people, and Apollo going there resourcing himself and so on and so forth. So we get this view that the closer you get to the North Pole, you talk about it as a place of greatest dignity. I'm doing it on purpose because then if you look at the history of how people have been writing about it, you get a very different picture. Right? So I prefer to keep this happy picture in mind. Still, as you go along in time, of course, we don't have time to develop this history of how people have been writing about it. We get into what you could call the quest of the sublime. That is to say that people have been looking at the Arctic as a kind of expression of what European people understand to be the sublime. It is, of course, a projection onto space. And it's important to stress also that in Europe we have taken a habit of distinguishing between ourselves and what we call nature. And that this is, of course, not the worldview that you find in many parts of in the Arctic in general, amongst indigenous people. It's very different. So we do have the theory of the climate from Greek times, and we do believe that the place we are born in has an impact on us somehow. But we've also had Descartes, and we've had Immanuel Kant, and so we're convinced that there's man, and he's there to dominate the thing. So the Arctic scene as a sublime, as an expression of the sublime. If you go to a place like Tromsø, for example, and you will tell people that, what people mostly say about the Arctic is empty. I've heard people in Tromsø say that's insulting, I'm sorry, we live here, and Tromsø is a very big place, and that's just one example of many other cities and places, of course. So, but this is the kind of image that we've had for a long, long time. So Francis Cooper wrote an important book about it as far as the English are concerned, Ice and the English Imagination, and of course, when it comes to the 19th century, then the Arctic is almost like a kind of backdrop or the ideal scene to expose the virtue and the qualities of the English explorer who is fighting the elements, as it were. And this is the image that has stayed with us for quite a long time. Similarly, expressions that we've been using in Europe for a long, long time about indigenous people of the Arctic vary enormously, but most of the time originally at least, they are pejorative. And a lap, for instance, of course, it's completely wrong nowadays to call somebody a lap, a Sami person. But they used to be called laps, and if you look at the dictionary definition, MHG means Middle High German. It's a negative term, right? And of course we have a long history of people looking down on Sami people. Well, we have maybe something that might strike you as being slightly more sympathetic when you could look at Greenland as being called Arctic Highlanders. John Ross is a person from Scotland, and when he saw them, it reminded him of Highlanders. So that might be a compliment from his point of view. Or you might find it problematic because the Highlands in Scotland is one thing and Greenland is another thing. So, but we have had also other people who have taken a different term, like Wrangel, for example, who talks about the Tungus people as the French people of the tundra. It's interesting, I've compared different translations of the text by Wrangel, and in the French translation this sentence is not there. But in the 19th century we had a much looser view of what a translation should be, and people took a lot of liberties. Maybe they just thought the whole thing is too long. So. Anyway, in the 20th century we start having a different view, of course. Stefansson, I'm not going to go into this famous explorer who is polemical in other ways, but he did make a point of writing a book called The Friendly Arctic because he wanted to bring this point across that the Arctic is not a hostile space, and people there are absolutely wonderful. So I'm apologizing to the representative of Canada. I don't have Canadian photos for reasons of copyright. I'm only referring to my own collection. One thing before we get into climate change that I also wanted to say is that indigenous people have, of course, a very different view of the environment. And so you have a quote here from Tom Nornstein, who wrote an absolutely wonderful book about a whale hunt in Point Hope in northwest Alaska, and who explains how the topography is actually the evolution of the topography is explained by the indigenous people through mythology. They have a story that this is important to notice that when we come there, we have a very different view of the same space. And we're meeting people who see the space very differently. Okay, now we come to development and climate change. So I don't know if you can actually see enough on the photographs. I'm just trying to show you that we have different viewpoints of what is going on. And Rovaniemi, incidentally, both photos are taken from Rovaniemi, is a touristic hotspot. Right? There are increasing numbers of people coming there. Some people find this very positive because it brings income, of course. For French people, Rovaniemi is beginning to be a very sentimental place, and we're going to have a direct flight from Paris in this next winter season because it's Santa Claus and people love going there. But on the left-hand side, you can see somebody who wrote a graffiti on the building site, mind your own business. Right, and mining stories in Finland, there are many stories to tell about that. And then the other one is watch it, Santa Claus. Right? It's of course a bit of a joke, you might say, but still, I mean, not everyone is necessarily very happy about what's going on. And then tourism in Greenland, same thing. There's a big discussion as to A, whether this is a good thing, and B, how many people should be actually encouraged to come to Greenland. So this gentleman was very happy doing his job, but taking us on a ride in the icebergs, and he was very kind and didn't mind people taking a photograph of him. That was part of the deal. But the other photo shows a plaque that Ilulissat is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and well, you can see what somebody scribbled on it. I don't know who did it, of course, but there we are. Okay, when I was in Greenland in 2012, there was an exhibition in Ilulissat in the house where Rasmussen comes from, by Danish photography. He showed photographs of Greenlandic people, and then there was one sentence by each person about climate change. And the views were varying enormously. Right, so we've had a few comments about that already, how people may think about climate change. It's of course true that in Greenland, climate change has the impact, amongst other things, that more land is accessible. And this may have an advantage in some respect, but in others it might be problematic. Okay, and what about the cold itself? Of course, in Greenland, when I was there, people were joking and saying, it's it's too hot, right? It's not cold enough. We were in Umanak, further up north, it was in November, and we had about -5, and people said, this is not serious. You know, what can you do with a temperature like that? So you have a photograph on the right from a school in Yukaghir, it's at the end of the fjord of Umanak. The schools in Greenland, incidentally, are very, very impressive in terms of equipment. We were envious when we saw their tactile screens. And, you know, it's very, very impressive. The right to be cold. Well, Yakutsk is, of course, a place that is famous for its cold temperatures. And nobody would say that we're not happy about having cold temperatures. That's the way it is. It's our life. It's our culture. Right? And same thing in Greenland. So you have a famous Inuit leader, Shiloh Cloutier, who has published an autobiography a few years ago. It's actually called The Right to be Cold. It's a bit of a slogan if you want, but she decided to use it as a title of her book. That it's our traditional culture. But then, again, we should not romanticize cold, as Alexandra shows in her book, because the cold is, of course, also potentially very, very dangerous. Right? So on the one hand, you have somebody to have the right to be cold, very good, but you know, moving about in extremely cold temperatures is serious business. So we need to think about that. Okay, and then maybe to end, one more remark from her, that whatever you may think about climate change, it is emphatically a cultural issue. And the fact that she introduces the cultural theme is very important. So if I can end on that, I make a recommendation, because he said we can make recommendations if they're heard. Fair enough. I know there's an initiative going on right now with people from the University of Alaska to interview young people in the Arctic about their identity. And it's very important work, but the means are fairly limited. I talk to them. And we need a vast kind of survey of young people everywhere in the Arctic to understand why these suicide rates are so high. And who we are actually talking to, right? So this is a really important issue, and perhaps something can be done. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jan. We have time for a few questions if there's anyone in the audience who would like to ask one. Jan, of course, will also be here later. So you can ask him during the break or afterwards. Any questions, or everyone is just too excited for refreshments? I understand. Thank you to Jan, thank you to all of our speakers so far. Now have a short break so you can mingle, meet each other and freshen up, and we will meet back here in this room at 8 p.m. Thank you.